In the late 1950s, while government granaries stood full and guarded by armed soldiers, millions of Chinese families were boiling tree bark just to quiet their hunger. This wasn't caused by drought. It wasn't caused by war. It was caused by a promise. One man claimed he could turn China into an industrial superpower overnight. He said sheer human will could defeat nature, economics, even reality itself. His name was Mao Zedong. In 1958, Mao Zedong, the leader of the world's most populous nation, made a stunning promise. He declared that in just 15 years, China wouldn't just catch up to Great Britain, the cradle of the Industrial Revolution. It would blow past it. He promised to launch his country from a state of agrarian poverty into a modern, industrialized, communist paradise, almost overnight. It was a vision so ambitious, it was breathtaking, mobilizing hundreds of millions in a fanatical, nationwide crusade. But this utopian dream wasn't going to lead to paradise. It was about to plunge China into a living hell. The plan, called the Great Leap Forward, wouldn't forge a superpower. It would forge the deadliest famine in human history, a catastrophe that would claim more lives than all of World War I combined. This is the story of how one man's colossal ambition, fueled by radical ideology and a terrifying disregard for reality, starved a nation and created a tragedy on an unimaginable scale. To get the Great Leap Forward, you first have to get the guy behind it, Mao Zedong. On October 1st, 1949, Mao stood in Beijing and declared the founding of the People's Republic of China, ending decades of brutal civil war and foreign invasion. In the years that followed, his authority seemed absolute. China's first 5-year plan, a copy-paste of the Soviet model focused on heavy industry, had actually produced impressive results. Industrial output was up, and the Communist Party had a firm grip on the country. But Mao was impatient. He was a revolutionary, not a spreadsheet-punching bureaucrat, and the slow grind of Soviet-style development bored him. He was also fiercely competitive. After Stalin died, Mao saw himself as the new head of international communism. He looked down on the new Soviet leader, Nikita Khrushchev, and his whole peaceful coexistence thing with the West. Mao wanted to prove that his brand of communism, a Chinese version built on the raw revolutionary power of the peasant masses, was better. He believed China could skip the boring parts of economic development and leapfrog straight into pure communism, doing, in a few years, what took other nations decades. This wasn't just about economics. It was pure ideology. Mao had an almost mystical faith in the power of human will. He was convinced that by mobilizing the sheer number of Chinese people, he could crush any obstacle. Logic, expertise, science, all secondary. Revolutionary passion was the only thing that mattered. He saw China's massive population not as a problem, but as his greatest asset. A blank slate where he could paint his masterpiece. In early 1958, Mao rolled out his vision. The Great Leap Forward was on. The initial goal? Surpass Britain's steel output in 15 years. But as Mao's excitement grew, the timeline shrank. First to 10 years, then 5. By the end of the year, some officials were claiming it could be done in just 1. It was a campaign driven by slogans, powered by fanaticism, and completely unchained from reality. Mao's plan stood on 3 radical pillars, and each one would be a nail in the coffin. The first would tear apart Chinese society at its very roots. The people's communes. The first pillar, and the most socially radical, was the creation of the people's communes. Before the leap, China had already collectivized farms, grouping families into smaller co-ops. The communes were something else entirely. These were massive, militarized superorganizations, some with over 20,000 households, designed to control every single part of a person's life. In a move that's hard to even imagine, the state wiped out at almost all private property. Peasants were forced to give up their land, their tools, their animals, even their homes. Family life, the bedrock of Chinese society for thousands of years, was systematically torn down. Husbands and wives were often split into separate dormitories. Kids were put in communal nurseries, the elderly in happiness homes. And the private kitchen, the heart of the home, obsolete. All cooking was now done in giant mess halls where food was supposedly free. Your pots, pans, and even wooden furniture were confiscated, often to be melted down or burned as fuel for the other pillars of the leap. Communist propaganda sold this as the dawn of utopia, a world free from selfish family ties. It was framed as the ultimate liberation, especially for women who were no longer tied to domestic work. Life was run like an army. Bugles woke peasants at dawn. They were marched in brigades to work in the fields or on massive construction sites, often for 14-17 hours a day. They weren't farmers anymore. They were cogs in a giant machine. The system was designed to squeeze every last drop of labor and every last grain of rice out of the countryside for the state. But by destroying personal incentive and the generational knowledge of farming, the communes were planting the seeds of total agricultural collapse. The second pillar was the most infamous symbol of the leap's industrial madness: the backyard steel furnaces. Mao got obsessed, like really obsessed with steel. He saw steel output as the ultimate scoreboard for national greatness. Overtaking Britain became a national mania. But instead of using big, modern steel mills, Mao called on everyone, the masses, to make steel themselves, in their backyards. Across the country, millions of peasants were pulled into this bizarre project. They were told to build small, janky furnaces out of clay and brick. These were farmers, not metallurgists. But expertise didn't matter. Party cadres, desperate to prove how revolutionary they were, pushed the campaign forward with insane zeal. But there was a tiny problem. What do you melt? People were ordered to feed the furnaces with any metal they could find. This meant their own cooking woks and utensils, now useless thanks to the mess halls. It also meant doorknobs, hairpins, and, most catastrophically, their own farm tools. Their plows, hoes, and sickles were all tossed in. Then there was the fuel crisis. To keep the fires burning, huge forests were clear-cut, causing massive deforestation. When the wood was gone, people burned the timber from their own houses, and in some horrific cases, their own coffins. And the result of all this frantic work? It wasn't steel. The furnaces couldn't get hot enough. The steel they produced was brittle, useless pig iron, worthless for any industrial purpose. This wasn't sabotage. It wasn't stupidity either. It was millions of people obeying something they knew was wrong because they were told it was right. Even when told the product was garbage, Mao defended it, saying it showed the power of the masses. The consequences were devastating. It pulled tens of millions of workers from the fields during planting and harvesting, and it destroyed the very tools needed to farm. The third pillar was a war on nature itself. The Four Pests Campaign. Launched in 1958, the goal was to kill China's four biggest enemies: rats, flies, mosquitoes, and sparrows. The first three made some sense, but sparrows were on the list because of some very simple and very wrong math. Sparrows eat grain seeds, so killing them should mean bigger harvests. What followed was a nationwide extermination campaign on an unbelievable scale. The entire country was mobilized. People were told to bang pots, pans, and drums to scare the sparrows, preventing them from ever landing. The idea was to force the birds to fly until they literally dropped dead from exhaustion. People tore down nests, smashed eggs, and killed chicks. The result was staggering. An estimated 1 billion sparrows were killed. At first, it was celebrated as a huge win. A few brave experts, including a respected ornithologist, had warned against this, pointing out that sparrows also eat a ton of insects. They were ignored, their ideas dismissed as counter-revolutionary. The consequences of this ecological ignorance came fast. With their main predator gone, insect populations, especially locusts, exploded. Swarms of locusts descended on the countryside, eating far more crops than the sparrows ever could. The campaign to protect the harvest had unleashed a biblical plague. This man-made ecological disaster, combined with the chaos of the communes and the backyard furnaces, created a perfect storm. China was now standing on the edge of a cliff. By the time the fields began to fail, no one was allowed to admit it. And once the truth became dangerous, hunger became fatal. The years 1959 to 1961 were the years of the Great Chinese Famine, a tragedy born directly from the policies of the Great Leap Forward. The pillars of Mao's plan, once symbols of hope, were now the cornerstones of a national catastrophe. The agricultural system that had fed China for centuries simply broke. It started in the fields, with millions of the strongest workers off making useless steel or digging pointless canals. There weren't enough people to farm. The commune system had killed any reason to work hard. If everyone eats from the same pot, why bother? On top of that, Mao had become a fan of pseudo-scientific farming techniques from a discredited Soviet scientist named Trofim Lysenko. Cadres forced peasants to do things like deep plowing and close planting, based on the wild idea that plants from the same class wouldn't compete. Seeds were planted way too deep and way too close together, where they rotted in the ground. These crackpot experiments, plus the locust plague, led to a sudden, catastrophic drop in grain production. And this is where the tragedy becomes a state-enforced nightmare. Even though the harvest was failing, local officials, under insane pressure to meet Mao's unrealistic targets, just started to lie. They competed to report ridiculously inflated grain numbers, creating a paper harvest that only existed in their reports. One commune famously claimed a yield so high, the wheat would have been piled 16 feet deep across their entire field. These fantasy reports went all the way up to Beijing, where the central government, including Mao, either believed the lies or chose to. Based on this fake data, the state set its grain collection quotas. The government took its share first, to feed the cities, pay for industrial projects, and even increase food exports to the Soviet Union and others to prove the leap was a success. In 1959, just as the famine was taking hold, China's net grain exports hit a new record. By some calculations, the food China shipped out of the country could have fed 16 million people for an entire year. Back in the countryside, the result was apocalyptic. After the state took its grotesquely inflated share, there was often nothing left for the people who grew the food. Even worse, when people started to starve, the government refused to admit there was a famine. Instead, it accused the peasants of hiding grain. Anti-hoarding campaigns were launched. Party cadres raided homes, beating and torturing anyone they suspected of stashing food. This wasn't a famine caused by a simple shortage. It was a famine made infinitely worse by policy and control. In many places, government granaries were full while people starved right outside the walls. According to historian Frank de Cutter, the party knew it was starving its people. Checkpoints were set up to stop starving villagers from fleeing to find food, trapping them in their villages to die. The commune system, which controlled all food through the mess halls, became a weapon. Cadres could deny food to anyone who was sick, old, or branded a slacker, sentencing them to death. The state had total power over who ate and who starved. And as the food ran out, millions began to die. It's hard to wrap your head around the scale of death. Most modern historians, like Frank de Cutter and Yang Jisheng, estimate that somewhere between 30 and 45 million people died between 1958 and 1962. It's a range that some scholars push as high as 55 million. For perspective, the total number of deaths in World War I, military and civilian, is around 20 million. Mao's grand experiment killed more than double that. It was, and still is, the single largest famine in recorded human history. But numbers that big are impossible to grasp. What does 45 million deaths even look like? To understand, you have to look at the individual stories of unimaginable suffering. The journalist Yang Jisheng, whose own father starved in 1959, documented the horrors in his book Tombstone. He describes a world turned completely upside down, where the basic bonds of humanity were shredded by hunger. As food vanished, people did anything to survive. They ate leaves, tree bark, and grass. They ground up corn cobs to make a coarse flour that tore up their insides. When that was gone, they ate leather from shoes and drums. Some even ate a type of soft clay that filled their stomachs but couldn't be digested, leading to agonizing deaths. In the hardest hit regions, like Henan and Sichuan, the horror escalated. Historians have uncovered reports that describe a landscape of death. People too weak to work were just left to die. And then came the ultimate taboo: cannibalism. In the most devastated regions, it became a horrifying feature of survival. There were reports of neighbors eating the bodies of the dead, of strangers being killed for their flesh, and, most horrifically, of families eating their own children. This wasn't a quiet death. Violence was everywhere. The state's hunt for hidden grain was savage. Cadres, under pressure to deliver grain, routinely tortured people. Villagers were beaten to death, buried alive, or tied up and left to die for stealing a single potato. Frank de Cutter estimates that at least 2 to 3 million of the victims weren't starved to death, but were tortured or beaten to death by party members. It was a mindset laid bare in a chilling directive often attributed to Mao himself, spoken in Shanghai in 1959. When there is not enough to eat, people starve to death. It is better to let half of the people die so that the other half can eat their fill. While historians debate the precise context, the statement reveals the terrifying logic of the regime. Individual lives were completely expendable. The famine wasn't a secret. The leadership knew. For years, they did nothing. While millions starved, telling the truth was a dangerous job in Mao's China. Any official who dared report what was really happening was branded a right-wing deviationist and swiftly purged. Fear ensured that only good news made it to the chairman's desk. But by the summer of 1959, the disaster was just too big to hide completely. The breaking point came at a high-level party meeting called the Lushan Conference. The meeting was supposed to be about fixing some of the excesses of the leap. But the whole vibe changed when Marshal Peng Dehuai, China's defense minister and a hero of the revolution, wrote Mao a letter. A private letter. In it, Peng respectfully laid out the problems he'd seen. The fake harvest reports, the waste of the furnaces, the suffering of the peasants. He blamed it on petty bourgeois fanaticism. Mao didn't see a loyal warning. He saw a personal attack. In a rage, he circulated Peng's private letter to everyone at the conference and accused him of leading an anti-party clique. The message was crystal clear. You're with me, or you're an enemy of the revolution. Faced with Mao's fury, the other leaders folded instantly and denounced Peng. Marshal Peng was stripped of his titles, disgraced, and put under house arrest. The Lushan Conference was a tragic turning point. Instead of stopping the madness, Mao doubled down. The purge of Peng sent a wave of terror through the party, silencing anyone who still had doubts. The Great Leap Forward roared on for another 2 deadly years. It was only by late 1960, with the economy in shambles and the death toll impossible to deny, that a retreat finally began. Mao was forced to step back and let more moderate leaders like Liu Shaoqi and Deng Xiaoping manage the economy. These men quietly started undoing the damage. They broke up the communes, gave private plots back to farmers, and reopened local markets. They even started importing grain from other countries. Slowly, painfully, the famine began to end. At a major party conference in 1962, Liu Shaoqi delivered a shocking verdict. The famine was 30% natural disaster, 70% man-made error. For his role in the catastrophe, Mao was sidelined. He kept his title as chairman, but he stepped away from the day-to-day running of the country. The failure of the Great Leap Forward was a massive humiliation. But Mao wasn't the type to accept defeat. His retreat was just tactical. He simmered with resentment against the men who had criticized him and dismantled his dream, especially Liu Shaoqi. He would spend the next few years plotting his revenge and his return to absolute power. The seeds of his next and even more chaotic campaign had been sown. The Great Leap Forward was over. But its failure would lead directly to the terror of the Cultural Revolution. The Great Leap Forward started with a promise of heaven and ended in a tour of hell. It was a catastrophe born from a perfect storm. Ideological extremism, a cult of personality that put one man's ego above all else, and a political system that crushed the truth. Mao's belief that sheer willpower could defy the laws of economics and nature was proven horribly, catastrophically wrong. The people's communes destroyed the family and the will to work, gutting agriculture. The backyard furnaces pulled millions from the fields and melted down their own tools to make useless metal. The Four Pests Campaign, in its stunning ecological ignorance, unleashed a plague of insects that ate what little harvest was left. And through it all, a system of lies and fear made sure the government took grain from a starving countryside, partly to export it and prove the success of the leap. The result was the greatest famine of the 20th century, and likely the deadliest in all of recorded history. An estimated 45 million people died. They were lives sacrificed on the altar of a failed utopia. For years, the official story in China blamed 3 years of natural disaster. But it was, as even President Liu Xiaoqi admitted, overwhelmingly man-made. It was a terrifying lesson in what happens when you give one man, convinced of his own godlike genius, absolute power over the lives of millions. The story of the Great Leap Forward is a harrowing reminder that when truth is silenced and dissent is a crime, the consequences can be catastrophic on a scale that is almost impossible to imagine. The failure of the Great Leap Forward was a deep humiliation for Mao. But it didn't end his rule. In fact, it just set the stage for his most vicious comeback. To see how he purged his rivals and plunged China into a decade of violent chaos just to get his power back, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell for our next video on the Cultural Revolution. And if you found this video informative, please give it a like and let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching.